an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It's showtime.
Well, here we go. Look at that, the 19th day of April. My brother-in-law Tim's birthday today. Happy birthday, Tim. Dr. Tim and PEI. Yep. And also happens to be, as of Sunday, today's Friday as we record this, Sunday is 3 years of Story Studio Network.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Well done.
Congratulations. That's great.
Yeah, it all started with, and I posted something on Facebook and on LinkedIn if you want the complete story, the rest of the story. But it just started with an idea I had. I was working on the development of a new show, and I thought, I need second eyes on this. And I just sent Aaron a text. And it said, got time for a quick call. 90 minutes later, we had Story Studio Network.
Right on.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. So we've got, and I just did a count last week. I have worked on 48 podcast series.
Those are series.
Series, not episodes. This is the first of the 48, by the way, this show here. But
there's no future in it. I'm telling you, there's no future.
No, you can't make any money doing it. There's nothing. I mean, people ask me, well, so what do you do? I said, I work in podcasting. You make money in podcasting? And I get a little offended, but then I realize anytime I have a comedian on a show, you make money telling jokes? Yes. And they get pissed off too. So yeah, we do. So here we are 3 years in, and a few more shows to in the works. So we're going to hit the blow past the 50 mark here soon.
Yeah, but the other thing that I find interesting about all of this is it's not that you're just producing a show. Like some people would think that that's the case, but you're not. I mean, you have to be up on all of these issues. You have to follow these issues. You have to be part of the story when you do it because you ask the questions. And so it takes a lot of prep. You know, it's like anybody who does a morning show, I suppose, or Keith, when you go on the air, you make it sound so natural. You got to be up on this stuff, and you got to be able to have a conversation. So it's way more work than what it seems to be.
When we're finished this, we're going to be doing some recording, some voice tracking on some scripting that we're doing. And Aaron is taking the lead on this show and has done all the scripting, but it's for Forest Nova Scotia. And we have just completed 2 series for the Forest Product Association of Canada. And when they heard that show, the Forest Nova Scotia folks, they called us and said, hey, we would like to do this. And it's a different show, but it's really interesting to see how organizations, nonprofits have decided that this is a great way to do good, deep storytelling, right?
To tell their stories.
Exactly.
To really tell their stories.
Yeah, and we had a just phenomenal conversation with a guy named Jamie Stephen, and he is basically a bioenergy expert, right? And he's down in Mahone Bay, so he's in Nova Scotia. And he was talking about, he frames the carbon tax better than anybody I have ever heard talk about it, in terms of how we should price carbon and then how effective it is and so on, and the effectiveness of EVs and the effectiveness of heat pumps. And he says he's not suggesting for a second that we can't have or shouldn't have electricity and the EVs, but he said the cycle we're on right now is going to burn out in the next 10 years. We're just not going to be able to sustain it. And the carbon tax is not doing a thing to help that, because, Keith, when you heat your house, you do not have an alternative right now. Even if you want to put a heat pump in your house, you're relying on somewhere down the road fossil fuel, particularly in Nova Scotia, because they burn coal to create their electricity.
There's no natural gas. There's no natural
right?
gas here. You can
right?
have giant propane tanks outside your house if you want to go that way.
Sure, but you're still paying. You have no alternative but to use fossil fuel to source your power.
Absolutely none. I mean, you can go solar panel, I guess, if you wish, but still, you have to be hooked up to the grid no matter what.
Yeah,
and let me
entirely.
assure you, power bills in Nova Scotia, and you don't call them hydro bill. That gives you a getaway as an upper Canadian.
Yeah.
it's easily double what I was paying in Ontario. Again, factoring in the size of the house and all that sort of stuff. The power bills here are just really, really expensive. And it's going to get more so. I mean, they're asking for like 10% hikes and whatnot. It's just crazy. So there's no choice on the fossil fuel. The carbon tax, I think it's the type of issue that has just divided people along political lines more than anything else at this point. Because when we hear, the big stink, it's going to go up, 3 cents a liter. And gas went up yesterday, 15 cents a liter, 18 in Peterborough or something like this. So the carbon, as we've discussed many times, is up and down 3 cents a liter on a tax rate. It's just not even noticeable. It's not even there. So what good is the carbon tax doing for us? Is it getting us to lowering our emissions? Is it helping? I don't know. I see it as something. It's that they use the phrase virtual signaling, and I think in a great many ways that's how a lot of, especially opponents, view it. But even those of us that think something has to be done, there should be a price on carbon, wonder specifically what the carbon tax is really doing. What's it
entirely? It does. It's not changing behavior. That's what it is. Not doing that. So people will say, well, more people are in the market for EVs. No, there really aren't. That we're not there yet either. So it's just fascinating to me to see how the carbon tax is in its own little silo, John. People hear it, they respond to it, they react to it, and that reaction in many ways is dangerous, if you will, to the whole point of the carbon tax. And that is to say, if we've got a problem with the climate, we better be focusing on it. To Keith's point, because of the reaction and response, visceral mostly, to the carbon tax, we're missing the point around what it is we're trying to accomplish here.
I suppose so, and it goes without saying that it's become a very politic thing. But the reality is that Pierre Poilievre has made it the ballot question in this country, and it was recently shown down east where you are, Keith. I mean, there's by-election there. I think it was just prior to the last by-election. It was when Krista Freeland was in Prince Edward Island and basically said, it doesn't really have any effect, and then she was ridiculed for it, and then the federal Tories went in and won a by-election there. I mean, it has a huge amount of traction. The amount of people in the Maritimes from, when I do the polling, that shifted over to the conservative side and who are against this is remarkably high. So no matter what we think, this should or shouldn't do for the environment, and yes, you're right, Dave, we've lost a sense of what to do about the environment. It was a lot easier back in the early 1990s when it was just about a blue box and trying to convince people to put stuff out at the curb. If you can believe that we had that debate, that there would be infrastructure around that, or even that McDonald's would lose their polystyrene clamshells. Today, it is nothing other than, we know the phrases, axe the tax. And they're going to carry this through. The Conservatives will carry this through right to the ballot box because they can. But there's no discussion really around the other stuff. I mean, when Dubai is getting 250 millimeters of rain in one day, so they seed some of the clouds, with the rice and all that stuff. But when you start seeing these phenomena around and you don't hear of any potential solution to any of it, it's I don't think you get frustrated anymore. I think you just block it out and move on. So the tax itself as a ballot question is what it's all about.
Okay, the recovering news director in my head is saying, for the first-time listener, welcome in. This is On the Ledger, Ontario Politics Podcast. The voices here are, I'm Dave, he's John Wright from Maru Public Opinion, and Keith Leslie is a veteran observer at Queen's Park here in Ontario, and you hear him on CH Television, on the O Show with Laura Babcock. So I just want to set the table here. I realize we got off on a tangent. We're 6 or 7 minutes into the show. We rolled right in, man. But yeah, the PD would have been on the bat phone there if we had done this on
to
on
John's
the radio.
point, though, there is an alternative. We had it originally in Ontario, the cap and trade.
Yeah.
Which I think worked really, really well, at least as far as consumers. I don't know how it seemed to be shaping up as a reasonable market for the large corporate polluters, but it didn't seem to impact, at this corporate tax level, which is just anathema to most voters. You're just adding to the price of gas, you're adding to the price of everything. I mean, it's just so easy to pick it down and shoot it apart. Whereas cap and trade, most people thought nothing of it, other than hopefully it's a program that's addressing carbon.
is going to get passed along. Let's face it, the cap and trade costs are passed along to you and me and John. But the other part of it is, and I realize that one of the major complaints around cap and trade is that there is not a consistent price on carbon. So Ontario could set its own price, or Quebec could set its own price, and then Norway could set its own price.
But you don't have to buy at that price. That's the whole. The market was setting its own price levels. That's how it's supposed to work. Yes, Norway wants this much. Well, you're not getting it. We'll buy the California stuff. We'll buy the Quebec stuff. There was a growing market there. We needed to see it shake out and expand to national levels all around. It didn't get there, but it could have. And it was certainly a lot more palatable, I think. Yes, costs would have been passed along, but not in the form of a carbon tax that you're handing the opposition party just something to beat you over the head with relentlessly. And he doesn't even have to offer any sort of alternative, really. He's not even talking about a cap and trade or anything else. He just axed the tax. Trudeau's forcing you to cost too much. It's all anti-Trudeau. There's no alternative here. And that's the problem with having something that looks, it's just a tax on everybody, despite the fact the rebates are going out and 80% of households are doing better than what they're paying. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
The feds are in an argument with the banks because they're
arguing
over how it's labeling the rebate in the,
This shows you screwed up the messaging
deposit.
on this from day one.
Oh, my God. Anyway, you talk about the gas prices going up. Yesterday, Doug Ford was in Oakville, and they were making some announcement about recreation community center funding and, all good stuff, right? Warm and fuzzy. And but at the end of it, he goes on this flippin' rant about the gas prices. And, you got to hand it to the guy, John. This is what he does well. Man, he was in the batter's box and he was knocking them out of the park, right? He first of all took on the 15 cent or 14 cent tax or gas hike at the pumps overnight, and then he claimed to be on the side of the little guy, and how can and the big gas companies are just gouging us, and how can they actually possibly tell me that the gas in that tank in the ground at 12 o'clock is different than the gas in the tank at 12:01. You went from winter to summer blend, and he's kind of got a point, right, around all this. The optics really suck. So he's got everybody cheering on him. Doesn't matter what side of the house you're on. And then he manages to twist it into the carbon tax, and he finishes, Keith, with Bonnie Crombie is the carbon tax queen.
It was actually...
it was operatic.
Oh, it was also so perfectly planned. In fact, he started to go on his rant, and they said, there's one more question. Oh, okay, I'll save it. And he took one more reporter's question. They said, okay, we're done with the reporter. Okay, now I want to talk about the gas prices. You're being gouged. And as you said, he talked about what's in the tanks in the ground, what's in the tanker trucks. All this is going up at the same. Like he was just making the kitchen table points that so many of us would make when we see gas prices jump by 15 or 20 cents a liter. And then he did the comparison. $3.50 US in states with comparable weather conditions to ours. $3.50 a gallon. We're paying, and he did the math. It's about $7.50 a gallon. It's just like he was making all the points. And yeah, of course, he took the 15, 20, and he hammered them. He accused the oil companies of price gouging. He was really strong and firm, but he did, he wrapped it up as that political bow at the end with the carbon tax, and Bonnie Crombie's the queen of the carbon tax. And let's just face it, that's the problem.
Yeah,
it's brilliant, brilliant politicking. It really was. He was very good at it.
Yeah, and that's why he doesn't need a platform, John.
No, and he had one in the House this week when the NDP went after him, and he went back after them about when there were some. Oh no, it wasn't the NDP. It was his former independent, the new independent member of the House, when she went after him about tax cuts and things like that, and he went back on full volley over her. I mean, he's got the retail politics down to an art. And so, I mean, they can reverse engines on a whole bunch of other things, but on this stuff, he just plows right ahead. And it's, what I find interesting in all of this is the chorus of the premiers now. We've got the Conservative premiers across this country, and we've got the NDP premier in British Columbia as well, who have their views on this are making them very, very public in a unified way. And we saw Pierre Poilievre, who was demanding a televised debate with the Prime Minister and the Premiers to get together. That's not going to happen. There's no way, the Prime Minister's not meeting anytime soon with the Premiers, even on healthcare, I guess. But you know what? It's become a matter of discourse, and it's deciding elections at the local level. And I go back to what happened in the Maritimes the other day. I mean, the feds keep test driving this message, and it works with everybody. The fact, it's interesting as well. Why does when people talk about a blend, what is it? Like, what makes it so expensive? It's butane. You put butane in the gas so that it makes your spark plugs spark faster, and you get off in the cold winter. So there's no question that there's more warm winter in the United States than there is in Canada. It's got the lower latitude, and as a result, you don't have butane in the same areas of the gas flow that's in the United States. But yeah, it's something that it just is on the treadmill all the time. Like it's relentless. We hear about it all the time. So it's of course it's going to take advantage of it.
A couple of things. Yes, I think striking that populist chord and really championing and pounding the kitchen table there on everyone's behalf has been a success. But as I'm watching the monitors here, CNN is up, and right now they're declaring direct strikes between Israel and Iran are, quote, over. The Middle East is on fire, and they're debating the keffiyeh in the legislature, or is it in the legislative building? It's not clear to me, Keith, because I see reporting on both. You can't wear one in the House, and then I've seen others where you can't even wear it in the legislative building. You can't walk into the building with it on.
Apparently, security is asking you not to wear it even in the building. Right. But there have been not just Sarah John, the MPP for Hamilton, but several staffers as well have been wearing them in the building. So the Speaker's ruling was, of course, specifically on the House. I don't know if security, the head of security was asked, and he literally said, "I'm not commenting on this. I refuse. I'm just not getting into this." So whether the Speaker's ruling will expand to include the entire legislative precinct or just the chamber, I'm not really clear on that at this point. But,
and to be clear, that's his bailiwick.
That's
his
absolutely
authority.
He's the guy that sets those rules. That's absolutely his job. And remember, Doug Ford didn't want Speaker Ted Arnott to get a second term as Speaker when the Tories got reelected. He was against it, but the Tory backbenchers stood up and put Ted Arnott in as Speaker. He's a man of a lot of integrity. And he pointed out, quite rightly, I'm just enforcing the rules. You can't go in the legislature. If you're all wearing the same T-shirt, security's going to escort you out. If you have a pin on, they have to have a permission, unanimous consent to wear a green pin for whatever the day is, the purple, all those things. There's just no props allowed inside the legislature. And the Speaker said, his research said it was being used as a political prop, the keffiyeh. I think he's right in making that ruling. But he said, if you want to allow that in the House, just have unanimous consent. And apparently Premier Ford told his caucus members who were not comfortable with this, just don't come in the House.
Right.
But one, and I'm sorry her name escapes me right now, Robin, I forget her last name, Jewish member, I believe, and she felt very strongly about this. You got her name there, Dave?
Robin Martin?
Robin Martin.
Eglinton Lawrence?
Yeah.
Eglinton Lawrence.
Yeah.
She said no. And the Speaker said he heard other no's as well. It's a voice vote. So anyone calls out no. And it used to be...
It's not unanimous.
It's not unanimous. And Peter Cornwell used to refuse, the New Democrat used to refuse unanimous consent on anything the government wanted.
Right.
No.
It's like Rob Ford always demanding a vote count. It didn't matter how trivial the count was in the House.
But I thought through the TV screen that I heard other no's as well. But certainly she stood up and said, I did this. Lisa MacLeod, the longest-serving woman in the legislature right now, and the PC backbencher, was not in the House for the vote, but supported her move to say no, that this is a prop in the legislature, and we're not going to allow it. So it was really interesting to see the New Democrats the Green Party actually first asked the Speaker to change, allow this, to change his mind. Then the New Democrats moved a motion, and the Liberals, and then even Premier Doug Ford put out a statement saying it should be allowed. The Speaker should change his ruling. But the Speaker played it perfectly. It's up to the House to give unanimous consent. If you change it, absolutely, I'll follow the ruling of the House, but you need unanimous consent, and they didn't get it. So this has happened before, and what you can do is bring the motion right back again, even the same day, and seek unanimous consent again. So I suspect the NDP, if no one else, will try and do that again. But it was interesting to see basically all four political leaders tell the Speaker to reverse his ruling, and the Speaker went, well, it's up to the House. You're the elected members, and the House said no.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to me that even Ford weighed in before the vote, before the motion came up, right? So why would you do that? I mean, why wouldn't you kind of let the House have its say and then say, listen, the House, this is what I think. The House has had its say, move on.
Yeah.
All he has done is prolonged this for him. And John, I'm not sure he's on the side of the Angels on this in terms of how this is going to play. There's no way to win this discussion.
Well, I guess not. I mean, I act viscerally to a lot of this stuff, Dave. And,
well, that's right.
And so, but when I first heard it, I wondered, whether people were allowed to wear pink shirts in the legislature or orange shirts on particular days or other things. I don't know the ruling of the House on that sort of stuff. I mean, we're in a very charged time at the moment, and I'm not taking sides on this. I just won't. But the reality is that there are subtle symbols that are that make it into Parliament. I mean, it doesn't have to be overt. So I'm always the one on the side of saying, well, where does this go? Like, what precedent does it set? Like, are there certain days that you can do something and certain days that you can't? I mean, Keith, you're around the legislature a lot more than I am nowadays, but it seems to me that there are certain days that are put aside for certain things, and that members of the House have worn something or done something while they're there. And doesn't this, I mean, I know we're living in a very split time, and it was a complaint by someone in the House, but if that's the case, if you complain about Pink Shirt Day, does that suddenly mean that you don't? I mean, I don't understand what the limitations are, something like this. That's where I'm coming from on it, not so much on the symbolic nature of it.
I suspect you're right. I suspect someone could force a vote and seek unanimous consent to maintain Pink Shirt Day or any of the others. You would have to have, I think, a pretty valid reason for trying to raise that issue. But
does this
mean
that
though,
when an
that's where it
individual?
goes.
But does this mean that when an individual member goes to the Speaker and says, I'm terribly offended by this. It's absolutely politic. Blah, blah, blah. And then the Speaker has to come back and say, this is what the ruling's going to be. Like, again, he's opened the door to this. And it's, again, I'm not taking sides on the current situation. I just see it as precedent setting on things. And you and I know that that's how this House works. I mean, that's how the Speaker, it is based on precedent. He even cited going back in time. So my visceral response was not so much to the issue of the Palestinian Israeli situation. It was more of, isn't this interesting that once you're starting to do that, you're starting to draw lines on other things as well. So I guess we'll see when we get there. But we know that there are certain people who are vehemently opposed to other things, and this may open the door to it fully.
Well, I think the result in all of that is that you will have almost a complete ban on anything that is symbolically political or politicized or weaponized, even if you want to go take the extreme, because that's what's happened to the keffiyeh, right? It's become not just politicized, it's a weaponized symbol now in the whole thing in the Middle East that's going on. So I can see, to your point, John, if one individual went to the Speaker and said, I'm offended by that, that right away means there's no unanimous consent in the House to wear pink shirts or a daffodil pin on your lapel, whatever it might be. It may, in fact, put the House back in a place where we'd have none of these expressions, period. And I don't know if that's a bad thing or not, but maybe that's the outcome of this. I was really looking for a sound effect this week to throw into the show. I just didn't have time to dig it up, but it was going to be that sound of the truck backing up, right? Yep. Yeah, because that's what this week has been all about. I don't know where we want to start, but I talked to Richard Lyle this week. He is the president of ResCon, the Residential Construction Council in Ontario, and for a guy who is on the front lines of the home building, he's saying, "Yeah, this is great. We've got some good things in here, federally, provincially, but I got news for you. our 10-year runway is down to 6 years. I mean, we're running out of freaking runway here. We got to get some shovels in the ground and start building. The concern around housing and the cost of housing, and that's, he's saying, is the number one thing. It's not the value of the home. There's a difference between the value of your home and the cost of building your home, and that, you know, kind of kills it all the way around. But he says the number one thing we face in Ontario is the cost of building a home, and by his numbers, Keith, it's something like 30% of the cost of building a home is all paperwork, basically permits and paperwork.
Well, this is why development companies have a big staff and charge a hell of a lot for a house. It's crazy that there's that much paperwork. I mean, on the other hand,
but that's driven by the province.
It is,
and the municipality.
And the municipalities, and that's what we need, clear-cut rules. And I guess this is what the feds are trying to force the province to do to some degree. You know, let's have fourplexes by right of way, all these other sort of rule changes that can make it standardized, so the developers, we can maybe cut down that 30,000, you know, down to 20 or whatever. Cut that paperwork load. Cut the regulatory. Just as you say, the paperwork. We need the regulations. They need, you know, we have to make sure that the houses, that the roofs don't blow off, that there's strapped down, all these different things that are involved in the house building. But some predictable way of keeping the costs overall down and just standardized building. And here's where we're seeing this interesting fight between the feds and the province. Whereas the feds have, you know, they're putting $5 billion, $6 billion up for housing policy, $5 billion of it for the provinces. But they want to have this fourplex by right of way, and Doug Ford is saying no. But he's also saying, you know, the municipalities, let's work together. If the feds want to work with you, that's okay. You can get the money directly from them, but don't be forced into this fourplex by right. So he's trying to strike a deal, and I think the reason he's feeling emboldened by this is because this week the feds caved on Highway 413 in an environmental assessment, which I thought came right out of the blue. I was kind of surprised, given all the talks, the rhetoric of the federal environment minister on this project. They just caved completely. So here the feds are going to help or clear the way for Highway 413. Why wouldn't Doug Ford think that they'll eventually, you know, cave on the fourplexes and these other regulatory changes that they're trying to force on the provinces to get housing built, standardized housing built much quicker? Why should he? Ford's going to get his way on this, or at least he thinks he is. But to your point, if the feds don't help streamline the regulations and get everything cut down, it's just going to add more and more to the price, the cost of building the house. The value of the house, yeah. I don't know how the market determines that, unless when you build on federal lands, you build houses that the feds keep the land, you lease the land back, and you can't sell the house at a profit for 10 years, or some sort of regulation like this to get young people into these new, like, you know, the wartime housing that was built after World War II. That same sort of thing on federal lands. The only way to realistically do it is to somehow cap the price or cap a resale because the price on resale, because otherwise people are just going to flip them. We can't. That's not going to help young people get into the housing market. There are ways to do it, but absolutely we need the feds, the province, and the municipalities all going in the same direction here, and we don't seem to see that yet.
Well, John, I saw a piece online, just a warning, just to be prepared for a $2 million average home price in the city of Toronto in a very near future. That's where we're going. So, you know, when we hear all this about making it more affordable and blah, 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 the market's just taken off, and there's no sense that any of this is under control.
Yeah, and for those of us who live in our retirement, thank you very much. We'll join Keith down in the
But where are you going to go when you want to
move
out
I'm going to go
home?
and join Keith. Yeah. That's where we're going to
Come on in, folks.
Yeah,
he's got a lovely finished basement.
You know, but it always comes down to a couple of questions in my mind again. First of all, right, let's eliminate 30% of the cost in the paperwork and see whether or not, in fact, that gets passed on. I doubt it. I mean, you know, it all comes down to private enterprise to build homes, and whether or not you've got the labor in a huge demand that's going to be at a certain cost to do it. So I'm not convinced that this is going to help in the short term, maybe in the long term. But the other point too is there was a case in Toronto, at Bloor Street in Bathurst, where there was an entire subdivision came together to go against the building of a small apartment building that was going to go in. It was going to be at level heights with everything else. It was going to have a laneway, and this was just decided the last few days. And the city council caved on it and basically said, okay, well, we won't allow it to take place. Now, the developer had done everything that was possible. And it was the group of people in the neighborhood. And it came down to the opposite argument. And that was, okay, you put this thing up in our neighborhood, the value of our own houses is going down. It's kind of like, well, okay, but then we don't have these people coming in and producing revenue, which is then taxed, which helps us with a whole bunch of other things. And the reality is that over time, if the demand still exists for those houses, the value of your house will go up anyways. Like, it's just going to happen. So again, you get this kind of lofty rhetoric about whether or not we're going to get levels of government doing something about the housing crisis. And it comes down to the local area of people who basically say, I'm not going to have that in my backyard. And you can call them whatever you want, but at the end of the day, it's about that. So here's your question. As a city councilor, do you want to be overruling all those people in your backyard? And all politics is local. So, again, we can get into this and we can cut costs here and there. I think the answer is not so much that we stay in the city of Toronto, but that we move, that we have other centers. I mean, I grew up in Markham after we had lived in Toronto for a period of time. We started out in Ottawa, we moved to Kingston, we moved to Toronto. We were at Don Mills and Shepherd in 1968, and the Fairview
Peanut
Mall
Plaza.
the Fairview Mall was not even built. It started in 1969. And I was saying to my kids who think I'm an ancient dinosaur, the other day that I remember living in Markham in 1972, I think it was, and you could see the lights of the city so far away. And then it just crept every single time, and it's the same when you're in Barrie, Ontario, looking down. And my kids, where my son is living now? I have two kids that are out on their own and they're living in other places. One lives in Kingston and the other one lives in Newmarket, outside of the city. And they can afford a house. Katie's got one. James is saved for one and they can do that. So you sort of go, well, not everybody can live outside of the city. Granted that, but that's where people have to go. And I don't know, what you do with upending people's lives who are here already. But as I go back to what I said at the outset, a lot of people may complain about the cost of housing here, but there's a whole lot of other people sitting on homes, which have gone from the value of, $300,000 to, $1.6 million. And that is going to be their sale at some point. And that is for some, it's their retirement. So I just don't know how we're going to solve this. I don't think we're going to be able to solve it by throwing money at it, by letting people get certain deals on mortgages or other things. What that's going to do is inflate the price because more people can get into it.
Completely. It just makes it more expensive in the long run, 30-year amortization. And I saw yesterday, it was stateside, but the 30-year rate was 7%. So, in this day and age, holy crap. But anyway, I mean, that's my point, is that there's a lot of numbers being thrown around, a lot of back-patting going on, a lot of announcements going on. And I share, the frustration that we heard from Tim Hudak last week on the show, and I talked to Richard Lyle on Now and Next this week, that can we just get shovels in the ground? Can we start to, at least streamline the approval rating? And that should at least cut down on some of those costs. But I still don't understand the logic, Keith, behind the fourplexes. I mean, I'm pretty sure I heard Calandra say, well, they all want to do it, but, they don't want us involved in it, and blah, 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 blah. The biggest problem that we have more often than not with housing supply, and this is to the point John just made, is City Hall, is the mayors of the various communities across the province. It's not the same. I don't have the same opportunity. There needs to be that level of standard, and that lives on Paul Calandra's desk right now.
Absolutely. What do you think is the biggest source of political donation money at the municipal level? Developers. Yeah. Naturally it is. So therefore, it's always weighted in favor of them to some degree, but that also gives the municipal councils, they realize they then have all the power. And they need to keep that power by getting reelected. So if your neighborhoods that you're representing, to John's point, don't want a simple fourplex, which can, fit into a lot of neighborhoods a lot better than the McMansion you're allowed to build. If you tear down a single-family mansion, you can build if you tear down a bungalow. but you can't put up a fourplex that looks even smaller than that. Why? It's the NIMBYs, and they don't want, well, there's 4 people, 4 families, it's going to be 4 cars, it's going to be all, yes, there's infrastructure issues that have to be addressed, but they can be addressed and fit into neighborhoods. You don't load a neighborhood with fourplexes, you fit them in where and when appropriate. You make it easier for developers to develop. If you have a new subdivision of them, then that's the way it's built, but it's built with the proper, parking in place for everyone, enough infrastructure to go. But at this point, I just don't see where to John's point, where the future, how do we get the houses built at a price that can stay affordable for anyone, that can be affordable or attainable, I guess is the word they want to use now, as opposed to affordable. It's just ridiculous. Dave, when you started this, you talked about using the truck backing up sign. I thought for sure it was going to be about the UP Express, well, the sort of express, because it's going to have the 2 stops put back in again.
Well, I don't quite get it. In one breath, the minister is saying, this is a great idea, but we've just told them not to do it. I mean, wasn't that sort of the play?
Pretty much.
It was head spinning.
It was wicked quick. It absolutely was wicked fast, as they say in Boston.
And the premier throwing Metrolinx under the bus.
Oh, yeah.
Literally and figuratively
like
on this.
LCBO with the paper bags. This is exactly, that wasn't our idea. We don't micromanage these guys, except when they do something we take the heat for. Then we micromanage them right out the gate. And so this one, the UP Express, again, to Premier Ford's point, who came up with this one? It just didn't seem to make any sense. These 2 stops where the UP Express, for those outside of Toronto, the Union Pearson Express makes 2 stops that join up with the Bloor subway line that runs right across the width of Toronto. This was great. If you take that away from them or reduce it to every half hour, people that live in the northwest end have to go to the southeast end to get back out northwest. It just made no sense whatsoever. So politically, it was smart to turn that one around quick, but the poor minister was left out literally dangling, defending a policy that they're going in his ear, like, no, we're done with this one.
He's going to need physio on his neck. Oh, my God. His head was spinning.
It really was. Whereas the whole LCBO paper bags thing, that took a few months to hit the Premier's desk. Someone clearly got that one to the Premier's desk. The UP Express one, that got to the Premier's desk in like minutes.
I think who was making the biggest bitch about this is just anecdotal, but and it happened almost like within hours. I was in a liquor store and I had my bag, and the woman at the cash was filling my bag, and she's, God, I wish we still had the paper bags. And I said, well, don't get me started on the bullshit around how paper bag bans save trees. They don't. And I'll go on that rant another day, but they don't. And she says, yeah, well, I really do wish. What a stupid idea. 24 hours later, the premier clearly heard her, and the paper bags were back, right? So, but it was astounding to me to be able to look at that. The only thing I want to finish on is Vic Fideli was up in his hometown of North Bay this week, and waving the flag for the provincial government and all the good work they're doing on housing, and what a great job North Bay was doing, and they got their big fancy check because they met their standards. And Salma Makwa, who is the NDP member in Northern Ontario, said, oh, hang on. There are, I forget what it's like 160 long-term care beds that they're counting in the total for North Bay's
housing
home building. Fideli doubled down on that again, saying, no, these people consider these homes. Really? No, I mean, I get it. We need them, but to somehow suggest that is considered a home? How many seniors or folks who live in those homes lying in the bed saying, I want to go home?
Yeah. How many of us any of us that have visited a loved one on a regular basis inside one of those homes?
Don't tell me that's a home.
No, they are.
Now, do we need them? For sure.
Room and their place. Absolutely. They're a massive need. But there's also a need for the new type we've seen in I think it's Sweden, where they have the whole little village for people with dementia. That they can, we need new approaches as well, as opposed to just the LTC institutionalizations. But we absolutely need them. They are not homes for your housing target. That's just political bullshit.
Well, John, maybe if they put the money into retirement homes, the three of us could take advantage of that, and we would live in, nice little gated neighborhood, and away we go.
Yeah. Let me end on a piece, and maybe we take it up next week. I thought Steve Paikin had a piece wrote a piece this week where he talked about whether or not the Conservatives would think about going early to an election campaign. And we, in fact, know that, for the last number of people who have been in the Premier's office, there was, the predictability of every 4 years has been there for some time. But it was just a notion of, well, it may be convention more than regulation. It may be something where the Premier wants to go early, and his argument was, even though I found nothing in the polling and others find nothing in the trade-off between if you have the Liberals in power in Ottawa, you have the Conservatives in in Ontario, and then it flips the other way. The reality is it may be getting to the point where the Conservatives in Queen's Park may be thinking about that. So do you want to go before the federal election? I just thought it was an interesting commentary because there's some, there's some rumor to it at the moment. And the question is whether or not they pull the trigger into it before Bonnie Crombie actually gets a chance to go anywhere.
Or before Poilievre gets any real traction in the election campaign.
The point I was going to make. The carbon tax and the tax and all that sort of stuff, may go to the other foot. So it was just an interesting thing. Maybe we can visit it sometime.
Ask David Peterson about pre-reading the tea leaves and going a year.
Well, he traded some Senate seats away too. Remember that?
Yeah. Dave, just before we go, one set of numbers, and you can edit this out if you want, but this really caught me this week. The report of the online gaming, iGaming Ontario. Fiscal 23-24, 1.3 million Ontarians bet $63 billion online.
Whoa.
And they're mainly young men.
So those ads that we all hate work.
But nothing to worry about, Keith and John, because we've got Connor McDavid sitting there saying, if you've got a problem, you can dial this number and everything will be fine. You're okay. And if you've seen that ad in all the hockey games and sports and everything else, it goes from Connor McDavid being very serious to some guy sitting in a room and it's full of bobbleheads. Like, this guy's got a problem. So the messaging in the ad is all fucked up even. And I'm thinking, oh my, this is an issue. You can't tell me that based on those numbers, we don't have a gambling problem.
63 billion online gaming? That's not the casinos that are all over the place. No. 63 billion online bet by 1.3 million Ontarians in 1 year. And I think, by the way, that's up 81% from the fiscal year before.
Holy cow.
Well, and again, I've done the research on it, and it's a sizable proportion, 4 in 10 young men who are doing that. And they are all, Josh is 22 years of age this year. He and his friends have been into sports betting now for quite a bit. The reality is that they don't do it through OLG or through platforms like you would have down in the Maritimes that are all regulated and all that stuff. One of his friends, I'm not fooling you, one of his friends made $105,000. He lost 20 before he got there, but he made $105,000 off of a online casino in England. So, it's the appetite of this is now everywhere, but it's primarily among young men who are doing it, and you and I know they are betting on almost everything there is out there.
Wow. Well, they've gamified betting.
Yeah.
Right. They've taken the game out of the game and they put it into the betting, and that's the attraction to the whole thing. So, yeah. Well, let's dig in on both of those things next week, shall we? We got some time to look into whether or not the Tories go early and whether our kids are, they've decided to spend their inheritance.
No, that's the only way they're going to get money for a down payment, buddy.
Maybe, or get kicked out of the NBA. Either way. All right, that'll do it. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. I'm Dave Trafford. He's Keith Leslie and John Wright on Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.